I'm reminded of when all this kind of came out, the settlement, when NAR announced the settlement, because it kind of came out of left field.
Yeah.
And everybody started freaking out. And I remember you and I having a conversation that evening, and you're like, I don't really care. I'm just going to do business.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, well, that's kind of a weird way to think. This is like a major deal. And, I got, the analytical part of me just really wanted to dive into it.
Thank God, because I don't want to read all that stuff, and then you just give me the synopsis.
And, it's why everybody else is freaking out. You're over here with 10, 11 pending.
My thing is, if I do my job right, the money will be there. And if it means where I have to learn how to renegotiate different things, then that's just what's going to happen. But somebody's going to have to do it, and it might as well be me.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the New Agent Jumpstart podcast. My name's Colt Callison. I'm here with my co-host and wife, Ashton. Say hi.
Hello.
Hello. So welcome back to this week 5, or this is our 5th one. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, this is crazy.
I don't know about you, but every week it just seems to get better and better. Like we get more subscribers, more interaction with people. The amount of feedback has been amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I love that there's people now that are like, hey, I want to be on your podcast.
I know, right?
And I'm like, yeah, you do.
Like, we're not even that big. Like, I think right now, we got like 45 subscribers on YouTube. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, yeah. What Gary Vee says, don't talk to me about your first, 10 episodes. Come talk to me about your 100th episode. Or maybe that was Mr. Beast. I don't know. One of those guys that are big. But, I mean, we'll get there.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe we'll have 47 subscribers by then, but I don't know. But no, this is cool. So today, I feel like I need to apologize up front because this is going to be one of those that I just get a little worked up.
Well, I think in a way, too, we're kind of sick of the subject, even though we're bringing up the subject.
Yeah.
Because so much of what we're having to talk about is redundant.
Well, it's redundant, and there's so much misinformation out there, and it's, just doing a little bit of the research to prepare for this episode. It's amazing to me on how little real estate agents actually understand this topic, how we get paid, what's around commissions, who's actually paying for it, all that kind of stuff, and the requirements going forward. So, yeah, I'm passionate about it because if we as an industry maybe understood our industry a little bit better, maybe this wouldn't have ever happened. But it is what it is. We are where we are. And hopefully at the end of this, if you stick around and listen to the end, we're not just going to be complaining about the situation. I mean, we're going to bring up some good points, but we're also going to let people know how we are handling it, what we're doing to move forward. And honestly, what we do, we're not really having to adjust that much.
Well, and the key thing here is understanding that just like with any new change, you either adapt and adjust to it or you fail.
Yeah.
And so the biggest takeaways from today is basically sharing how we're not thinking this is an absolute catastrophe. It's something that we're going to have to discuss in a little bit more detail with our clients. But at the end of the day, if you're talking the way you're supposed to and you treat yourself like a professional, this shouldn't be that difficult to adapt to.
No, and I think, honestly, the only reason why we have to communicate with our clients a little bit more about it is all the lies that are spread from our media. I
mean, you go on CNN and the person writing that article has never sold a home in their life.
Exactly.
And they're talking about how this is going to change the entire industry when they don't even know what the industry is.
Well, and ironically, it's, I think NAR, National Association of Realtors, in my opinion, I think they're so distant from the day-to-day in the trenches, what we do. I don't even think they have a clue how real estate is handled, and they're supposed to be the guys that are leading us, guys and gals. And then to throw fuel on the fire, you have their attorneys who have never dealt with real estate litigating on our behalf to try to, it didn't make any sense, right?
And also making a great commission,
Making a great commission, but so, and just so we can make it clear, I mean, here's why the consumer is so misinformed and so confused about everything. CNN, the 6% commission on buying or selling a home is gone. Also CNN. These are just a couple headlines. It didn't take me but 5 minutes to find these. CNN, why are real estate commissions 6%?
I would love to answer that question too.
Why are they 6%? And why that might be changing? Well, for one, it's never really been 6%, right? I mean, it's people, well, here, CBS News, NAR agrees to eliminate rules on commissions. Standard 5 and 6% commissions will no longer be the rule. It was never standard. I mean, you just lost out on a listing appointment, or not a listing appointment, but a listing just today. You were informed you didn't get it. And it's because that agent took that listing at what, 1.5%?
Yeah.
So you mean that was an option this whole time? Sellers could pick and choose and not hire certain agents based off what they charge?
Yep.
I mean, we're not, I'll be the first to say we are not the cheapest agents in Wichita.
No.
We're not. So, and we don't even charge 6%. We could charge more. Right? And so, but with that, there's value behind it.
Well, and that's kind of the thing that I want to explain to my potential clients. There is a big difference between someone that is getting paid their full commission that they have set in their mind. Because we have an idea of our fee of what we want. But there are also agents out there that they'll take whatever business they get and they'll just go put a sign in the yard. Because the truth is, as a listing agent, that's all you really got to do is put a sign in the yard until it gets under contract. But the proactive agent, the one that's going to work hard for that commission, is marketing. And all that marketing is done up front. The seller more than likely is not paying for any of that. And so you are earning that commission before you even know if you're going to get paid on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not trying to sit here and justify anything that we charge, but we treat our business like a business. We have expenses. I mean, if people knew what we had to make each and every month just to keep the business running without even bringing anything home ourselves,
Right.
It's more than what the average American household makes in a year. And I mean, that's all before we make a profit, right? So again, it's not to say, oh, poor pitiful us, because we're doing just fine. And you even on that seller that you lost out to, you refused to lower your commission, and you even said, I'd love to have your listing,
Right.
but I don't need it.
Yeah.
Because you have how many pending right now?
11.
11 pending.
Yeah. And that gives you freedom too to pick and choose who you're willing to give your time to. Because I can tell you 100%, the client that you get that requires you to lower your commission is going to ask you to do something else.
Yeah.
Because you have opened that doorway, you have lowered the boundary, and they now think they can pick and choose what you get to do and what they have to do.
Yeah.
And by you having a fee and you sticking with that fee, it shows that you're a business, you're the professional, and you have control of the situation. And I do not go out to get a listing to see how easy I can make it. I go out to see how can I impress the seller so I can get more.
Absolutely. Right before we hopped on recording this, I was on a mastermind session on taking listings and everything like that. And one agent got on there and said, hey, I got this, $1.6 million listing. And, we were on the market for, I was the third agent. It was expired twice. I was the third agent. And we were on the market for 60 days. And the seller did not want to budge on price. They did not want to move. And we didn't have any offers. But what the seller decided they wanted to do is lower the overall commission, right? So that, and they took it out of what they were offering to the buyer side, right? So I think in her example, they were offering 2.5% to the buy side. The seller wanted to drop that to 2%. So you're now creating less of an incentive for an agent to bring you a buyer. It still nets you the exact same, but and they still didn't even want to, actually it netted them more because she even said that they didn't want to adjust on price even with that change. So in that case, you literally are coming up against an unmotivated, unwilling seller. I'm looking for ready, willing, and able clients to help in the first place.
Right.
So, and once we go under once we go live and we've signed the listing agreement, the commission's now off the table.
Right.
We're no longer negotiating. We've already had that negotiation at the listing appointment. And so that's where agents need to stand up for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, I mean, just to be blunt, if you are so weak that you have to negotiate your commission after the fact in that kind of situation, what kind of negotiator are you for your client?
Right.
If you're that quick on lowering your commission, and so as a seller, I would be very weary about having an agent like that in the first place. But sellers, I mean, you and I know sellers, they just look at their bottom dollar and what they could potentially get, and it's not what they're really going to get because
Here's
they haven't
the
got
thing
anything.
for me in this market, like if I get you an offer that's 20 grand over asking, I'm not asking for an extra 1%, even though I brought you way more than what we listed it for.
Exactly.
So there just comes a point where you have to realize this is just grandfathered in. This is part of the deal. It's a non-negotiable. Here's the money we have to play with, but this has already been paid out. And I like to make sure that my estimates cover every possible scenario that's going to come up in a transaction. So if there is something crazy like a bad repair request, we're already covered.
Yeah.
It's just finagling some of those numbers that were allotted for maybe a home warranty or termites or something like that. But your pay is your pay. And that's not part of the transaction.
Yeah.
That's an agreement beforehand.
Absolutely. I mean, here's another MSNBC, another great media outlet. Basically, if you've learned anything out of this, you learned that if it's on the news, you probably shouldn't even listen to it. And we don't watch the news. We literally had to Google these. Major change to real estate law could transform how Americans buy and sell homes, which I find ironic that they say it's real estate law because even in the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics, it states that MLS participants working with sellers must disclose in conspicuous language that the broker commissions are not set by law and are fully negotiable. So they've always been fully negotiable. Where I believe NAR went completely wrong with this is when they stated in section 16-15, it says in cooperative transactions, realtors shall compensate cooperating realtors. So basically, in the Code of Ethics, we had to put up compensation to a co-oping agent, right? And so that could be anything, though. I've seen in the MLS where it's marketed at $1. Well, that's I'm giving compensation, right? So now, is that the smart thing to do? Obviously not.
Right.
But they've met the requirement for the Code of Ethics. That's where I think NAR went wrong. You know what I think NAR should have done is say, hey, we're going to take out the requirement for compensation to a co-oping agent, but you're able to leave it in there in the listing so that everybody knows what's going on. Because I find that in an industry where for the last, 10, 15 years that I can remember, so apparently the consumer was screaming more transparency, more transparency. We've now made it less transparent.
Exactly.
And I don't really think the consumer was mad about anything we had doing. I think it was a bunch of attorneys that got together and convinced consumers that they were victims of a process that they agreed to in the first place.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you go to sign a listing agreement, it spells out everything that they agree to do. So if you sign that, it's a contract, it's an agreement. You should have read through that of what you are agreeing to. Now, I'm not saying that there may not be an agent that explains what they're signing, but as an adult human being, you are signing a contract. Read it.
Exactly.
And I know I just went on a listing appointment today and I explained this is the breakdown of fees. And we went line by line and there were questions, absolutely. But we had a conversation about that. So there's not going to be any hidden figures that are going to pop up where they're like, well, I didn't agree to pay you that. No, we had a conversation about it and you initialed right there.
And I think this is where I think NAR's attorneys went wrong, is they let the other side convince the jury that the seller was paying for this the whole time. But I find it ironic that, who's financing the whole thing,
Exactly.
right?
The irony is the buyer's paying for all of it.
The buyer's paying the whole thing, which creates the money to finance the transaction in the first place,
Exactly.
which gives the seller the ability to supposedly pay the agents, right? But if you really break it down, where they got it completely wrong is the seller was never paying the buyer's agent.
Right.
Never, right? The seller was paying a fee to the listing agent. There are two separate transactions. There's the transaction from seller to listing agent, and then there's a transaction between listing agent and co-oping agent, right? So if you were the seller and I say, hey, let's say I'm charging 6%, right? Because apparently, according to the news, that was the standard, right? So I was charging you 6%. I can do whatever I want with that 6% as the listing agent.
Right. I mean, how many people have we seen take 3.5% and give 2.5% to a buyer's agent? And I mean, there's been multiple times on the closing docs, I'm like, oh, they must have cut their commission. No, they just took more of the other side.
Exactly.
And so this has always been allowed.
Yeah, and I can I've seen a listing agent offer 1%. And I even called him out and said, is this real? And he goes, yeah, I'm the one doing all the work. Now, that was on a short sale.
Right.
And he was doing a lot of the work, but still 1%. But he has that ability, and that's always been a thing. I could take the whole 6% and say, you know what? You bring me a buyer, I'll give you everything. I don't want to get paid. Well, that's pretty stupid from a business standpoint for you, but that's still a possibility.
Right.
So the seller never paid the buyer's agent. The listing agent, or the listing broker, to be specific, paid the buyer broker.
A good thing to think about, like in my opinion, of this is how much control we have over that. There have been multiple times where my client has to bring money to the table. And as a rule, I really hate that. And if it's something I can help with, because there are dire circumstances that are outside their control, sometimes they have to move. Like I have dropped my commission by the amount they would have to pay me over. And that was my choice. We do have that control, but I didn't touch the buyer's agent's commission. That was something I agreed to offer them and split with them. So that's a non-negotiable. But at the same time, I had a deal where I told the buyer's agent, I was up front. I'm like, look, they don't have any money. Are you willing to work with me on this to get this sold? Because there were things that happened outside of both our control. And we communicated together as co-oping agents, and we both lowered our commission to where we split it. It was not 2%, 3%. It was a dollar amount that we split. I don't even know what the percentage was. But agents have always had the ability to talk about this. And sellers have always had the ability to see it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how many times I went to the seller and I'm like, look, here's what we're willing to do, so you don't have to do this. And they were like super grateful. But that was my choice. They did not ask me to do that. I made that choice for them. And so I think the disconnect here, and this is why people are freaking out, is they think all of this is set in stone. We're not going to have a say anymore. It's like, no, we're going to have the exact same ability that we had before. It's just now it's required for us to do several more steps to get the exact same result.
Exact same result. Yeah. And, I think it's funny that the attorneys, when you look at the lawsuit and everything, and after the settlement was even announced, the settlement had to be approved by the judge, right? And it got approved. But what I found was ironic about it is the attorneys for the plaintiffs, right? They were arguing that commissions were anywhere between 2 to 3%, for the buyer's agent, and then they turn around and charged 40%. 40% for their fee of the settlement. So, you got what was it? $480 million was the settlement, and they get 40% of that. But yet the sellers, who, by the way, get very little of that because it's a class action. There's a ton of sellers. And if you divide out the remaining portion, they get what, $20 a piece? I don't know what it is. It's some ridiculous.
It's ludicrous.
Yeah. So this was nothing but a money grab from attorneys, and we let it happen, right? But that's what happens when you get a group of people in, convince them that they're victims, and they don't understand. All they're in for is, oh yeah, what money can I get right now? They don't understand that, okay, this could be a problem in the future for me, because you've had clients that, recently you're having these conversations where, what do I have to pay for a buyer's agent to bring me a buyer? And what's your response to them?
I love this conversation because it really paints a picture of how much everybody helps everybody in this transaction. And so if a seller does not want to pay a buyer's agent and they're going to buy a house, I say, well, would you like to pay that buyer's agent, or would you like to have that listing agent split the commission with me so you don't have to pay for it?
Yeah.
And they're like, I didn't think about it that way. I'm like, no. And people don't think about it that way because they don't think about the other side. They think about their immediate profit. But the thing is, okay, fine. You don't offer that to the agent that brings a buyer to you. You're going to turn around, pay that to the agent that you go to buy a house with. So why do we need to change anything? It's insane to me.
So preparing for this show, I wanted to make sure that we had accurate information, right? So I went on NAR's website and I read through every single one of their Q&A questions. And I find it ironic that the question that says, why was this settled, right? NAR's own verbiage says, we believe this agreement provides a path forward for our industry and NAR. I found it very interesting, the verbiage to include NAR and NAR. Like, why couldn't they just stop, we thought this was a great path forward for our industry? Do you think that's got a self-preservation type of
100%.
tone?
100%.
So it's like follow the money, right? And then they even say, NAR will not increase dues for 2024 and 2025, which obviously, because we paid 2024's dues back in December of 23 for the year, right? At least that's how we pay it here with our board. And 2025 is right around the corner for when it's due, right? And there's still a lot of questions on is this completely settled and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, of course they're going to say that. But what do you think the increase is going to be in 2026 to make up for all these millions of dollars that they've agreed to pay out?
I hate to say it, but I think it'll be substantial, and it'll definitely show who was actually in it for the long run in real estate and who was like, well, was my hobby. It's not going to be anymore.
Yeah.
Because the fees right now, I mean, to do what we do, it's not that bad. I mean, if you're actually building a business, I hate the fees tied to it. Obviously, everybody does. But if you get to the point where the dues come due in December and they're double, triple, quadruple, like, you're going to lose a lot of people.
Yeah, and they already are, right? So I can't remember what the level was, but I think we're around 2008 levels for real estate agents nationwide. So they're already losing a ton of members. And then after these changes, the people that were in it for a hobby and don't want to adjust, or they don't have the right leadership to adjust, then they're just going to get out. So I think the overall membership for the National Association of Realtors is going to drop, and they're going to have to find a way to get the money that they were used to getting. And so there's only one way to do that, and that's to raise their prices. So
yeah,
I foresee a big increase when it comes to the National Association of Realtors dues, which really irks me from an individual.
What a benefit for our industry.
Yeah, what a benefit, right? So maybe I don't follow them enough to understand exactly what all they do, but I could tell you I don't participate in any of their classes or anything like that. And the things, I tell you, I don't follow them because I think they're a complete failure. And I can say that because if they've got our industry in such a whirlwind right now because of what they've done over the last 10 years, it was obvious they weren't doing enough training or enough education to the agents out there to where agents were telling buyers, hey, the sellers are going to pay for your commission or my commission. And they had agents saying to the sellers, well, you need to pay the buyer's agent. Those were the wrong conversations because they just didn't teach agents how it really works.
I wish the big name real estate gurus were the people in control of this situation, because all it would have taken was, let's take a look at this contract, explain what you just signed, and just understand that you signed this. It's an agreement that you signed.
Yep.
Like, this is coming from, I hate to use this in our podcast because it seems so negative, but a sense of entitlement that is running rampant in our country, where you think just because you don't like something, you should get paid back for it, or you're owed something. It's like, I don't know how many people I've had to explain, a contract is a legally binding document. If you choose to go outside the terms of the contract, you're going to lose your earnest money. This is a known thing, but there are still buyers out there that during the crazy bidding war stage of real estate the past few years, they thought, I could just change my mind and just get it back.
Yeah.
Like, no, you can't. You signed a document. And I feel like all it should have taken was someone that has been in the industry for years, that understands the rules and regs of what we do, just saying, the only way this is allowed to happen is because someone agreed to sign a document.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's any more complicated than that.
No, and it's not. And really, in the end, it's just going to hurt buyers, right?
Mm-hmm.
This whole thing is going to hurt buyers. Just think about it. In this industry, we find the value of a home with comparables, right?
Yeah.
And so just because the way agents get paid is changing, right, doesn't mean the comparables ever change, right? Mm-hmm. So our way of finding value for what a home's worth is not going to change. Mm-hmm. So if you're taking the buyer's agent commission, decoupling it is what the DOJ is wanting to do, and to where a buyer now pays for their own agent mm-hmm. in the transaction, and the seller doesn't pay for it. So now you're in a situation where the seller, let's say 3%, the half, right? Let's say the seller no longer has to pay 3%. Do you think they're going to find the value of their home and then turn around and say, well, now I don't have to pay for your agent, so I'm going to reduce the value of my home by 3%, and that's going to be your new price? Of course they're not going to. They want full price, right? Right. But now they just want the added benefit of not having to pay. So it's only going to help the buyer. Or hurt the buyer. It's only going to hurt the buyer.
Well, and I was just thinking about this, because we're already in a position, because of what the market was over the past few years, where sellers don't even want to pay closing costs.
Yeah.
Which are substantial, like 3.5% to 4% for most people of the purchase price. You add the 3% to that. No, like, you're not going to get a full price offer on your house because you have closing costs and you now have the buyer agency fee.
Yeah.
And I don't see our market being where sellers are going to get the same amount of money, because you're losing buyers. Well, if that's the case.
We'll talk about the conversations going forward and what the conversation needs to look like with your seller mm-hmm. now going forward, to make sure that they understand the process and why it's beneficial for them to offer something. What I find really interesting right now is you got, MLSs that aren't associated with NAR. They're private mm-hmm. MLSs. So you got like the Northwest Multiple Listing Service in Western Washington State. They account for 26 of the 39 counties in Washington.
Dang.
So over half. And they're saying, we're not playing by your rules. Mm-hmm. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Right? Now, does that open them up to litigation? Possibly. But I think it's just awesome that an MLS would say, we're not playing by it. We are not going backwards. And even the state of Colorado says, I need to look more into the Colorado thing, but I just heard something that they're not following.
They're not going to allow the buyer agency deal to go through,
yeah.
where you have to require that before you show a property.
That's it.
And then they were saying, too, that they were more worried about the litigation that could come from forcing someone to sign a buyer agency for someone or something they don't want. And that would be worse than battling, I guess, NAR. I don't know who they would be battling, but they just weren't willing to deal with that. They're more worried about getting sued because of how outrageous it is to be like, hey, you have to do all of this before we even really talk about anything.
Exactly. So, let's talk about some of the major things that, well, I say major, but really to us it's minor, right? Because we already kind of do all this. But for, I guess, our industry, I guess it's a major change. So, written agreements to act as buyer's agents, right? So now NAR has been advocating for the use of written agreements for years, and in this settlement, which I find ironic that they've been advocating for written agreements. we've always just done written agreement. If we work with a buyer, we're doing a buyer agency agreement, right? We want to make sure that we're the agent. But I guess, again, that's not an industry norm. NAR is requiring MLS participants working with buyers to enter into a written agreement with the buyers before touring a home, right? This change will go into effect August 17th. So again, we're talking about the NAR settlement, and all this takes effect August 17th. So I think it's funny that, NAR's verbiage is working with a buyer. So to me, when I say I'm working with a buyer, I'm only working with people that have signed with me, right? If you haven't signed with me yet, to me, I'm not working with you. We don't have a relationship yet. And I'm trying to build that relationship. So what I think we're missing completely is this industry is all about relationships. And if now you're forcing somebody to get into an agreement before a relationship is even built, I think that's a big disservice to the industry. And I think it's a big disservice to the consumer. Right? And so they say the definition of working with a buyer is touring a home. Right? Now, I get it. There's a lot of agents out there that get Zillow leads, Realtor.com leads, online leads, and they are more than happy to rush out there when somebody says, hey, I'm calling about this house over on 123 Main Street. I want to see it this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Okay, let me go out there and meet you. And they don't pre-qualify the buyer or anything. So,
which is super unsafe, by the way.
Super unsafe, right? So how do we as an industry, how do we need to adjust? I say as an industry because we already do this, but how do we need to adjust to make sure that we are setting ourselves up to be the professional?
I think one thing that I'm really learning the more I work with buyers is understanding that the agreements that we have in place are not only a protection, but it also gives us a position of authority in the transaction to give them the best value that we can be. So technically, when I go into a house and I don't have a written agreement, I should keep my mouth absolutely shut.
Yep.
Right? Once I have a buyer agency agreement in place, I have a lot of experience with bad foundations, bad windows, mildew, like all kinds of stuff because I've been to hundreds of home inspections. Like I have value that I could offer at a showing that could possibly prevent them some major issues down the road. So for me, it's giving them the understanding that, hey, if I'm representing you in this capacity, I'm doing a lot more than just writing up paperwork. I'm explaining to you what I see throughout the home. I'm making sure you get the best deal possible. Like it's a document that starts a relationship. And I'm very open. Like if we don't have a good relationship, I don't really want to work with you either.
Yeah.
And so some people are like, oh, I'm going to be tied to this person for the rest of my life. I'm like, it's not about that. If I make you feel that way, then there's a disconnect and I'm not doing my job.
Yep.
So to me, it's more of explaining the documents that need to be signed as this is how I'm going to benefit you in this capacity. Until I have this, I have to be tight-lipped. I can't even represent you.
Yeah. I go back to how I was trained, and this is why this is all kind of foreign to me of why agents weren't doing this. Because, I was taught the script LP Mama, LPMAMA, right? So you got location, price, motivation, agent, mortgage, and then appointment, right? If you don't know LP Mama, just Google it. It's all over the internet. It's the only buyer script you ever need. But I was taught to take an internet lead, whether it was Google pay-per-click, a Zillow lead, a Realtor.com lead, and I'm not rushing out to the house right away, right? I am taught to use that script to therefore get people to understand the value of meeting me in the office where we can have a full-blown buyer consultation and walk through the buyer process.
Right.
And at the end of that process, I've established value in that person's mind where they feel comfortable enough to sign a buyer agency agreement with me. And then from there, I'll set them up on an MLS search and do all the things that I need to do, help them get pre-qualified with a lender, everything like that. But I'm not doing any of that until they've decided that I'm their agent. But I feel like I have to earn that right.
Right.
I can't just show up and say, hey, I know we just met. Before we unlock this door, sign this agreement.
Well, and it could be something where it's over the phone, because like I have a lot of people that are out of state. I had a young lady that's in the military send me a massive list of questions through text, and she, I guess, mass texted this to several different agents, and I was the only one that responded. It was basically a chat GPT questions you should ask your realtor, and I answered all of them, and some of them were regarding signing a buyer agency. And so I wrote out the process, I sent it back to her, and we had a phone call, and she's like, okay, cool, send me the buyer agency paperwork. I read through all your answers. The fact that you even answer these questions for me tells me I want to work with you. And so, like, that's not exactly what you did, but it's just you need to have a conversation with people, telling them who you are so that they feel even comfortable having you represent them.
Yeah.
Because this is the biggest purchase most people will ever make. It is not something that should be sugar-coated and just swept under the rug, because for us it's routine, but for most people this is the most stressful thing they're ever going to do. You want to be someone that's going to be a good advocate and someone that's going to make them feel comfortable.
Absolutely. I mean, this is where I feel like, and I've been saying this for the last couple of years, we are coming into a skilled market, right? Where the agents have to improve their skills. And if you don't want to learn a simple script like LP Mama and how to, walk a client through the buyer process, right? Then you're just that transactional agent. You're just in it for the quick money. You're not in for the long term on the relationships. And I can honestly say that because I used to be that agent.
Well, and learning how to qualify your buyer by talking to them is a huge skill. Like, you have to have a conversation if you want to be a good real estate agent, because I just had a deal where the seller that didn't want to use me to sell their home because I wouldn't cut my commission, they wanted to go see a house first. And I said, hey, I love the idea of showing you a house, but that's not going to matter unless we talk about the sell of your house first.
Yeah.
And when I went to that appointment, not only did I have listing paperwork, I had buyer agency paperwork. And when they weren't ready to sign with me for the listing, I did not go show them the house they wanted to see.
Yep.
So I qualified them. I met with them. It wasn't a good fit. I also didn't waste my time showing them a house that I'm not even going to be paid on.
Yeah.
So you have to have the hard conversations, or I will say you have to make an effort for the relationship first if you want to have people comfortable with you.
Okay. So basically, in essence, what we're saying for those out there that, hey, how do I move forward from this aspect of the requirement? Learn LP Mama, right? Learn the process of having a professional meeting with the individual, the potential buyer, and act like the professional that we should be.
Learn to ask questions, because people love to talk about themselves. The more questions you ask, the more they're going to want to talk to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to the second major one. There's really only two major ones. There's the written agreements to establish an agency or non-agency relationship. Non-agency for people like us in Kansas is if we act as what's called a transaction broker. So we have, the state of Kansas says we can have a customer, which is somebody that we assist with the transaction, but we don't represent, right? That's a non-agency. So we're not their representative. Or we can have an agency relationship where we are a designated buyer's agent, designated seller's agent, something like that. Or if you're a broker like I am, I'm an agent of the seller or an agent of the buyer. And everybody else in our brokerage works as a designated agent for me. So that's kind of the change with that. And then also when it comes to compensation being transparent, which again, it was transparent before and now it's not going to. We're not allowed to, advertise what we as the listing agent are willing to offer a buyer's agent in order to attract them to, be incentivized to work with us, right? So I find it interesting that NAR says that we cannot have our commission dependent on, helping somebody. So NAR is essentially saying that if the deal comes down to whether we get paid or not, we're still supposed to help the client get the home, even if it means we don't get paid at all. I'm just going to say, I think that I get it. It's code of ethics, whatever, but that is absolute bullshit, right? Because these people set up in their ivory towers somewhere. I don't even know where NAR is. That's how much I don't give a crap about them. But they set up in their ivory towers, and they're getting paid.
Right.
And if they were so good at real estate, I guarantee you they wouldn't be in their positions where they're no longer selling anymore. They would still be real estate agents.
That is so ludicrous. Like, I'm just thinking in the aspect of if you have an employee, that's like us being like, well, you shouldn't want to not work for me based on what I pay you. You should just want to help me build my business. And then if you get something out of it,
you should be grateful.
Yeah, that's so great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, oh man, like I said up front, this one gets me going. I probably should have said up front, what's that disclaimer or whatever? We are not attorneys, luckily. Glad we're not. I know that's what you wanted to be earlier before you found a better way. But so what we say in this podcast should not be construed as legal advice or whatever.
I don't know how many times I've had to actually say, you should probably go talk to an attorney if you want to go that deep. I'm like, I have opinions, but that's all they are is opinions.
Yep. So let's get back to not being able to advertise in the MLS. Now, this is freaking out a lot when it comes to compensation. This is freaking out a lot of agents, right? I've had a lot of questions on this one. And here's the deal. Let me ask you this. Have you ever done a deal with an agent offering you less than what the fee structure was in your buyer agency agreement?
Yes.
Yes. Did it ever stop you from doing the deal?
No.
Why not?
Because at the end of the day, I see the lifetime value of a client. I have had clients that found out that they weren't going to pay me my 3%. They're like, I'm not going to go to them then. He's like, it's not about me having to pay you. It's just the principle of it. Because they just paid me to sell their house, no issue, And so it's learning how to actually communicate how that works up front with your buyer. It's like, look, this is what my rate is. This is what they're willing to pay me. Are you willing to pay the difference? And I will negotiate it into the deal as much as possible.
I was going to ask. There are other options that we can do, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I've had the conversation with clients that, hey, this particular listing is not offering the full fee that we've agreed on. So here's what I recommend we do. Let's go ahead and ask the seller to then pay the difference.
Right.
And that's in the contract. It's in black and white. So the seller can't say, well, I didn't know I was paying, because we're saying, hey, due to the listing agent offering this to satisfy buyer's obligation to buyer broker,
right,
seller to pay the difference of whatever percentage to satisfy buyer's obligation.
Right.
It's in black and white. And every time I've done that, it's always done. It's always went through.
Yeah, I probably gave you way more info than you wanted, but that just shows you how many different ways there are to handle a real estate transaction.
Absolutely. So, and then I know in our particular forms, and I know every MLS board is different, real estate board is different, and so everybody around the country has different forms. But in ours, they just released a new contract for these changes, and it specifies seller is paying whatever percent or flat fee towards buyer agent commission, or buyers are paying whatever. So it's all negotiable, and it's all out there on the contract. So I've heard agents say, well, how are we going to know what so-and-so is offering on this listing? Well, you don't need to know. Right? Because it doesn't matter. If you're just going to ask for it anyway, just ask for it on the contract, and then it's out there in black and white. Which I find, what's funny is I had a broker where the first time I did that, the broker at the time for me said, oh, I don't want to do that because that makes us part of the transaction. Well, ironically, years later, NAR settled out a lawsuit for $418 million and made us part of the transaction because now this is the way we need to go about doing it.
Right.
So, it's for all you agents out there, I know a majority of this podcast sounds like we're completely negative, but we're not. We're actually very excited about what's coming up. For one, because we know as the professionals, there's going to be a lot less competition. Two, this really brings up a good idea or a good point, that you should be heavily focused on gaining listing clients. You should be in control from day one, right?
I also want to add, this is a really good example of how you need to value the relationships you have with other agents, because your communication in a deal could be what gets you paid, and how you handle yourself with that agent. Because I don't know how many times I've submitted offers and they haven't been the best one, but I had a relationship with that agent, and that meant more to the seller than it did the actual dollar amount for the offer. And so we are getting into a time where your relationship, your communication, and your skills are really going to matter.
Yeah, I completely agree. Again, it all goes back to we're in a relationship-based business, not only to our clients, but also to the agents in the industry. And that's something that everybody needs to remember. Communication goes a long way. So just final takeaways. I mean, we've got to get really good at being professionals, walking our clients or soon to be clients, potential clients, through the entire process, whether that's on the buy side and really getting good at explaining how we get paid as agents, that really the buyers have always been on the hook to begin with, because they're the ones agreeing to a buyer agency commission. It was just in our old buyer agency commission said that, they're responsible for it. And to the extent that we can't collect that full fee, then they're on the hook for the difference, right?
Yeah.
So whatever the listing agent, if the listing agent was only giving us 2% and our fee was 3%, then technically they'd be on the hook for the other 1%. That's always been a thing. And then on the sell side, on the listing side, we need to be able to be the professional, show what the data is for what not only the market's doing, but, or explain to the sellers that, hey, if you're not willing to attract a buyer or a buyer's agent by compensation, this is going to hurt you in the long run. Which, it goes back to something that I found ironic, that Article 2 and Article 12 NAR's Code of Ethics, real quick, says a listing broker should inform the seller about costs the buyer will incur, how the buyer might react to those costs, and how the seller can market a house considering the buyer's cost. But the listing broker must not tell a seller that a broker will steer buyers based on the amount that broker is compensated. That's just added as of May of this year. I find it ironic that we can't tell them that a broker might take their client somewhere else because they don't offer compensation. But it doesn't say anything in here that a buyer might go somewhere else if now they have to pay their buyer's agent because you as a seller are not willing to pay that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's going to be a major conversation for sure with every single transaction, that you have a seller that thinks they're going to get all of it and put it all on the buyer. It's going to happen so much that I think it's going to get to the point where things will have to be adjusted again.
So I know this was a lot longer than what we typically go. If you've lasted this long, thanks so much for sticking with us. And man, I got to check my heart rate because that one.
I know. I'm like, well, that was fun.
That was fun. This one, I honestly didn't have as much fun recording this one as we normally do.
Yeah.
It's fun to talk about how to get clients and everything like that, but this is really important, and this is what a lot of agents are fearful right now. And hopefully out of all this you don't have to be fearful.
Yeah.
It's just change the way you operate, right? If you're not willing to change, then you're going to, get eradicated from this industry.
We need to constantly be growing anyways and sharpening our skills, and this has just put the pressure on us to do that.
Again, I hate to go back and say it, but I've always done business this way. I've always done buyer agency agreements and everything. So I didn't even know that this was a thing until the settlement even came out. And then I'm like, what are you talking about? Agents don't have these going in, But that, luckily, I was trained on how to be a professional, And I remember my mentor and team leader when I first got in, he asked me a question: do you want to eat at McDonald's every day for lunch, or you want to eat steak dinners? Right? And, I'm like, well, of course, steak. He goes, then you need to understand how to operate it from a professional level and how to be a business owner. And that's just the mindset I had going into it. So, with the commissions, guys, the industry's going to adjust. Sellers, we're going to go through a very small time where sellers might think that they can get away with not doing anything and still getting their house sold. And if it's in a strong market like 2020, 2021, where things are flying off the market, and you list a house and, in 24 hours, you got 20 offers, then yeah, maybe you can as the seller, and maybe we'll see that. But around the country right now, the market has slowed down, and sellers have got to be willing to attract buyers.
Absolutely.
So, sellers will adjust. We all will adjust. Anything you got to finish this out, or?
Honestly, I hate this subject so much. Like, it puts me in a bad mood, but it needs to be talked about. And if anything, it's just accountability for us to just do better with what we do. And it's a motivator to be the best. Like, be the best at what you do. Why would we not want that goal? And I think having that kind of forced upon us is going to change maybe even the way we do business, and maybe it'll improve things.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I'm not going to let this affect my goals in real estate, and I don't think it should affect anybody else either. If you want to be successful in real estate, adjust and adapt.
I'm reminded of when all this kind of came out, the settlement, when NAR announced the settlement, because it kind of came out of left field.
Yeah.
And everybody started freaking out. And I remember you and I having a conversation that evening, and you're like, I don't really care. I'm just going to do business.
Yeah.
Right? And I'd like, well, that's kind of a weird way to think. This is like a major deal. And, I got, the analytical part of me just really wanted to dive into it.
Thank God, because I don't want to read all that stuff, and then you just give me the synopsis.
And, it's while everybody else is freaking out, you're over here with 10, 11 pending.
My thing is, if I do my job right, the money will be there. And if it means where I have to learn how to renegotiate different things, then that's just what's going to happen. But somebody's going to have to do it, and it might as well be me.
Yeah. Yeah. Our industry is not going away.
Right.
So I know there's organizations out there that want to eradicate us as an industry and, take everything to an online transaction, but in my mind, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
We're too essential to the everyday homeowner on how to guide them through the biggest purchase of their lives or the biggest sale of their life. And, it is what it is. Ironically, people don't throw a fit about car salesmen and making a commission when they go buy a car.
Yeah.
It's just because our product is so much more expensive.
Right.
So it's always going to be there. So if you like the content, stick around, because in the coming weeks, it's going to get more.
We'll do something more fun next week.
We'll just liven it up a little bit better next week. But, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
It's long enough.
It's long enough. Make sure to, if you like what we're saying, how we approach it, as you can tell in this episode, we're pretty real. We'll give you what we really think about things like NAR. And, so come back if you want the real, I guess, no fluff.
Yeah.
Right. So you can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify, and you can find us on Apple Podcast. Every Friday, we launch it at 9 a.m. So until next week, see ya.
See ya.